Hello, I'm Axel Trolese and today I'm going to talk you about the wonderful Après une lecture de Dante, Fantasia quasi sonata by Franz Liszt, one of the greatest romantic composers. It has been really complicated for Franz Liszt to write it because he needed almost 20 years of his life to actually bring it to the final version. Before this version, other three versions actually have existed. The piece started to appear in 1839 and it was called Fragment Dantesque. It was divided into two movements. After 1839, it has become the Paralipomène à la Divine Comédie and the Prolegomène à la Divine Comédie, each one in 1848 and then 1849. Actually, the final version, Après une lecture de Dante, has arrived in 1853 and the title has been chosen also quoting the very famous Hugo poem, and it is part of the set of poems Les Voix Intérieures. But of course, it was not Victor Hugo the main inspiration for Après une lecture de Dante, even if it has the same title as his poem. It was naturally Dante Alighieri's Divina Commedia that Liszt read in the 1830s like many other cultivated men of that period. In 1827 he had lost his father, and since then he had also lost a little bit his creativity. He was already a composer, of course, but most importantly of all, he was a pianist and especially an enfant prodige. But he was entering the adulthood and naturally it wasn't possible for him to keep on being an enfant prodige. It was important for him to become a great composer, and that's also for this that he started to read even more than what he used to do before. In those years, Liszt did some trips in Swiss and in Italy, which led him to compose the Years of Pilgrimage, that are a set of pieces which contain musical inspirations from various places and also artistic expressions of the country he visited. Moreover, this is not the only piece that Liszt composed based on this poem. Actually, just a couple of years later, the final version of Après une lecture de Dante, in 1855 and 56, he would have composed the Dante Symphony, which is divided into three movements that represent, of course, the three cantiche, so Inferno, Purgatorio and Paradiso. And it is an incredible work, majestic and full of innovations, of orchestral innovations, I would say. The most important aspect in the Après une lecture de Dante is that there is no programmatic representation of the plot. The chronological order of the events is not strictly observed by Liszt. It is actually more like a musical impression which comes after the reading of the poem. In the past years, in the past century also, musicologists or commentators have always tried to find some kind of a plot. However, I think it was really not the case because the chronological order is just simply not there. We will hear that in a moment when we are clearly into hell, suddenly we feel the power of the paradise and the power of God. This is because no logic has to be respected in music. Let's start to talk about music. As the title suggests, it is a fantasia quasi sonata, and already we have a quote, because one of Beethoven's most famous sonatas, the Moonlight Sonata, is actually nicknamed Sonata quasi una fantasia. So Liszt inverts the terms also because his nature was completely different. Liszt was a great pianist and especially a great improviser, and the rhapsodic and virtuoso style that was the one that characterized him the most is of course found also inside his compositions. Fantasia, quasi sonata is exactly this, is the willing of structuring something which is completely free and improvisatory into a structure of like the sonata, which is a very strict and precise organization. To let you understand a little bit more what I'm going to say just afterwards, I also have to explain you what is a sonata. Not coming inside the details because this will be another lesson, but just to give you a few hints. The sonata form is invented into the classical period. It is based on a very simple principle: the opposition between two themes and the opposition between two tonalities, one for each theme. The sonata form is always divided into three parts: an exposition, which is the very beginning of the piece, and then there is the development, where these themes are destroyed and recombined, analyzed, and change completely their organization. And after the development, which is very often a conflictual phase, we find the re-exposition or recapitulation, as you want. And in the recapitulation, what happens is that we hear again the themes as they were in the exposition, but we feel some sort of peace and end of the conflicts that we experience throughout the development. This structure is also present inside the Après une lecture de Dante, but in the Romantic period the forms were actually much more complicated than in the classical time, and so we don't talk anymore about first and second theme, but we have to talk about first and second group of themes. Every element is not a theme, but anyway it's always related to or to the first or to the second. The first group of themes of the Dante Sonata is composed by 4 elements that recur throughout the piece. I will play you the elements, let's say, in their basic form. Let's start with the first, the most important one. It's an interval of triton, the Diabolis Musica. It was called like this in the Middle Ages, and this is because it was considered to be a devilish interval, a band interval also, completely different from the music of the spheres, for example, and the music that was allowed and accepted by the church. So this interval is this one. And piece by Liszt starts exactly with this kind of texture and rhythm. So, what is the important part here? Is this rhythm, pa-pam, pa-pam. The second motive of the first group of themes is a progression of accords that go up and that are very chromatic. These ones. The third element of this first group of themes is another completely different sound, is an alternating scale between the two hands. But the important thing is the scale itself, which will come back many times also. The third and final motive of the first group of themes is this one. So, a chromatic passage in octaves that goes towards the lower part of the keyboard. I will play now for you the first 2 pages of Après une lecture de Dante because, as often with Liszt, they serve as an introduction, and in this introduction you find the core of all the work. I would like to talk you a little bit about the tonalities of this piece. Après une lecture de Dante is a composition in D minor, D major. It is in D minor at the beginning and then ends in D major, but actually we never hear the key tonality in these first 2 pages. What we hear instead is some very interesting chords like this one. This chord is formed by 2 tritons. It is the diminished 7th. And it is the most devilish chord that you can possibly compose, and it is not a case that it is written exactly here. Normally, musicologists have always agreed in thinking that this beginning was related to the words that we read in the comedy just before the Hell's Gate, in the 3rd canto. Anyway, I don't think it is the case here, also because Liszt doesn't write anything. Instead, in the Dante Symphony, at the very beginning we have the words written in the score, that is, it is referring to the Hell's Gate, but here nothing. It is very strange for me that in such dramatic moment we also have some peaceful chords like this one. This chord is A flat major. It is going to be a very important key in the piece, a very important tonality, and I like to think of it of the presence of the provvidenza, which is always present in the commedia, even in the darkest moments, in the most difficult times for Dante. He always thinks about God and about his provvidenza. I like to think of this beginning exactly as as the very beginning of the commedia. So Dante in the woods that finds himself in the middle of his life and wants to climb a hill, but the three animals actually make him go backwards. And this fall from the hill maybe can be symbolic with this. So this coming towards the lower parts of the keyboard maybe has something related with the fall of Dante.